There we go, and welcome to our session on accounting information systems. So this session is designed just to get you the basics of accounting information systems, enough to get you through the CPA exam if you have not had the course. If you have had the course in the past, it'll be a good refresher. And also some information about accounting information systems is covered in other chapters in auditing because the two really are integrated. For example, we'll cover a lot in the sales and collection cycle when we get to that a little bit later in the course. Let me go ahead and share my screen. So we'll be referring to these notes. So an accounting information systems overview. So a little introduction as we think about accounting information systems. That's how the business maintains control over things. How the business makes sure that things go according to company plans, policies, procedures, and also how they make sure that financial statements can be prepared, which are reliable and are in accordance with GAAP. So let's think about that here a little bit more. So we know that an accounting information system, it really is a collection of resources. So collection of resources to input or capture, transform, store, and output data. So again, making sure that everything goes okay along here. Making sure there are no security breaches, such as people's credit card numbers, addresses, etc., are not leaked. We don't have a security breach. And there have been some very famous ones, even though it certainly was not the biggest. The company that's still, it's a poster child for this is which store? Target, yes. So Target has an unfortunate reputation, I'm afraid, that after a few years, they still have not been able to live down. But that's what happens when you get to be regarded as poster child. Well, the output results in the transformation of data into useful information, which may be compiled into reports. And as an accounting information system includes people, equipment, procedures, possibly software. And the functions are essentially the same in both the manual and computerized environment. So yes, things could be manual, and in these small companies still are to the most part. That's okay. Same principles we have here today are going to apply. So we can relate to that okay. And if we think about number one, a little definition here, an information system. It's use of information technology, or IT, to provide information to users. But a computer-based information system uses computer hardware and software. And we'll assume we're dealing with a computer-based information system unless we're told otherwise. Again, how much computer involvement we have, it may be very little. It may not be very sophisticated. It could be as little as using Excel or using QuickBooks. And then there's some different types of information systems. One is electronic data processing, EDP. It's use of a computer-based information system to perform transaction-oriented data processing. So in other words, process one transaction at a time, like one sale at a time. It's also referred as a transaction processing system in an accounting context. Again, processing just one transaction at a time. And of course, as an auditor, we're very concerned that each transaction is processed properly. There are no misstatements. Then management information system, MIS, provides decision-oriented information management. So let's transform that data and help management make some decisions. And commonly, these are for marketing, manufacturing, human resources, or accounting and finance. They may also be for customer relations management, CRM, or supply chain management, SCM, including materials requirements planning, or MRP. In other words, planning what raw materials and what finished goods we need to make our business run. Of course, seems like for every term that we ever encounter in accounting, we have an acronym for it. I know. No difference here. Then a decision support system, DSS. And no, you won't have to know these acronyms for the CPA exam, please. But provides information in a decision-making format for the user. So help that user make a decision. And if we think about a decision support system, that is a little more sophisticated. Then, more sophisticated still is an expert system. ES. It's a knowledge-based information system which acts as a type of consultant to the user and requires decision models and specialized databases as knowledge bases. And is characterized by the use of heuristics, in other words, some decision rules. And an executive information system is for the needs of top management. Accounting information system we defined above. And number 7, an enterprise resource planning system, an ERP, combines all the above under a single software package and a single database. Sometimes this creates additional problems though, because the degree of centralization there. Thus, the process of centralization is a double-edged sword. The re-engineering or rethinking everything we do required to implement an ERP usually improves business processes. So an ERP, controlling all the information needs really of the organization. So you may recall the 2 biggest suppliers of ERP systems. One is a German company, one's an American company. Does anybody remember? Yes. They do have an ERP, yeah. It's not the biggest in business, but they do have. Good. I remember. Yes. SAP, that's right. That's the German. And the biggest American one is which one? It's number 2 in the world. Oracle. Publix has SAP, and SAP people were at Publix here in Lakeland for over a year when they implemented that system way back. So it's a complicated thing to do. Having centralized processing, it's very, very good to ensure uniformity, to ensure that all transactions are done the same way. But if something breaks down, then the entire organization is out. We could talk to Facebook about that. Or Instagram had the same problem being out recently. Of course, we keep hearing calls for breaking up Facebook. Think that'll ever happen? Yeah. We'll see, but I'm not so sure. Well, here's some additional features we want in an AIS. Say that 3 times fast. Well, end user computing, EUC, is the hands-on use of computers by end users to perform the required functions, and that sure has expanded over the years. So the computer sitting on one's desk does a lot more than an entire mainframe computer did back 70 or 70 plus years ago. So more and more for end users, they are able to do more and more on their own computer. That can be very good. It can be very bad too from the standpoint of security. Then point of sale technology controls sales, either at the cash register or some other origination point. So point of sale technology, yes, over cash registers, but of course, more and more, if we think about end user computing, oops, I skipped something. Oh, I'll come back to it. Looking there at point of sale technology. More and more today with end user computing, we can control the sale on our own computer. So again, that has excellent benefits, or it can be a security problem too. So if we're buying something over the internet, we're dealing with point of sale technology. If we're ordering something from Publix to be delivered at home, we're dealing with point of sale technology. Or a competitor, and I see their trucks every now and then around here, a competitor to Publix is which company? Does anyone notice their trucks? If you're from north the Florida line, it will be a familiar grocery store to you. Kroger, exactly. Yep, Kroger. Excuse me. They have a warehouse in Orlando, and they're delivering in this market. I'm sure it gives them great pleasure to be doing so in Publix home turf. Now, Publix hometown here. Kroger would love to come to Florida. And they have one store on at Fernandina Beach, I think it is. And beyond that, they don't, just the warehouse, but they're trying to aggressively come into the market. Yeah, how many of you are familiar with Kroger from up north? Okay. Where are you from?
I'm not from, I have family up in like Chicago and stuff like that.
Okay, back where I'm from.
Yeah, so I've been and I've been.
Yeah. Some Kroger stores, the older model, they're kind of, yeah. But then they have newer ones, Kroger Marketplace, which are fairly nice. Yeah. Yeah. It's a very old grocery store chain. Yeah, but those from up north, they immediately recognize Kroger. And of course, with so many people being from up north here in Central Florida, Kroger's hoping that they remember them and they will look fondly upon their delivery system. All right, why skip there was number 2. With quick response technology, it's the ability of an AIS to respond quickly and accurately. For example, if Publix, or I'm sure Kroger, is out of something, they will let us know. Or if we try to order 2 and they only have 1 in stock, something like that. That's very quick response technology, so that we have an up-to-date idea as to what's in stock and what we can buy. So if I can only buy 2 of those, if I'd really like 3, maybe I'll buy 1 of something else, or maybe I'll buy 2 of something else, who knows? So it's a good way to maintain their sales. Well, I skipped also radio frequency identification, RFID. It's an application of quick response technology. And RFID tags are placed on objects to allow them to be tracked in real time. So with RFID tags, well, eventually stores would love to have these on inventory items, but they're too expensive right now for most inventory items. But the dream of retailing is one day, as you're in a store and you have a cart full of items, each one will have a very cheap RFID tag on. This allows them to keep track of the movement of the items. And when you check out, you would simply pass your entire cart under a detector and your order would be rung up right away. Or even better, with quick response technology, if when you place each item in the cart, it would be rung up at that point. So that way you have a running total of what you have in there. So we'll see one day. One company that does have it in their convenience stores, and I've never been in one, is Amazon. Remember passing one in Chicago. I didn't go in, but yeah, in Amazon little convenience stores of sorts, they do have that. So that when you take an item off the shelf, they know what you have. And that's also because no one is there to run a cash register. So I would say that being a cashier is not exactly a growth market. Coming on down to C, lean manufacturing. It attempts to eliminate waste and streamline production flow. It is based on the Toyota production system, TPS, requires much quick response technology. So trying to be lean, trying to cut costs whenever possible, trying to be frugal. That's what lean manufacturing is all about. And Toyota is the one that gets credit for that, for right or for wrong. Then just in time, produces and or purchases inventory just in time to use it or sell it. And the goal is to reduce inventory stockpiles and save inventory carrying costs because we have less inventory. Current sales create so-called demand pulls, which are orders for inventory. So it all starts with the end consumer. And then we subordinate everything else to that. And these can be automatically generated. So the end consumer says, I want to buy something. That generates demand pulls right back to raw materials. Here's how much we need raw materials right now to meet this order. Well, then number two, Webcommerce to sell via the internet. Requires the use of intelligent web-based software. And the transactions are normally encrypted to enhance security. Security can be increased by issuing passwords to authorized users. There should be a firewall or protection between the customer and internally stored data. CPAs can provide an assurance service which yields a Web Trust seal of approval. That was not nearly as successful as CPA profession hoped. But with Webcommerce, we're all familiar with it. Anytime we order on the internet, that's what we have. Then a very old term is number 4, electronic data interchange. EDI. It's a direct computer-to-computer exchange of business documents via a communications network. Relies on the information to be in specific fields on the documents, as well as other specific protocols. EDI is a term originating from the 1960s. And the original EDI protocol was based on the old COBOL language. So with EDI, that's become just kind of a generic term for electronic commerce, especially at the B2B or business to business level. And then number 5, extensible markup language, XML. It's a major improvement over traditional EDI protocols that allows data to be arranged in databases and to be tagged with identifiers. And then an advance over that is number 6, extensible business programming language. It's formed XML, which is for financial reports, and allows specific items to be tagged with identifiers. It was developed by an AICPA-led group. So if you look for a company's Form 10K online, you'll probably see a little tag on there that says XBRL. And if you click on XBRL, that means you can use XBRL software to analyze that company's financial statements, run financial ratios, etc. Does anyone ever know it XBRL beside a company's Form 10K? XBRL beside a company's Form 10K. Okay, yeah. So you've seen the button that says XBRL.
I learned about it in another course, and I know that companies have to use it for their 10-year returns and upload it to ACC.
Exactly. Yeah. Companies use that to code their 10K returns and upload that to the SEC's Edgar database. So next time you look at a company's Form 10K, I bet you'll notice the XBRL button.
There were some compatibilities issues that need to be expensive for companies to implement.
It is expensive, yes, especially the initial implementation. And number 7, EFT, electronic funds transfer systems for electronic movement of funds. We pay something online, we've used EFT. Actually, if we write a paper check, we're going to use EFT as well. Because what happens to that paper check? And it gets turned into a certified electronic version under Check 21, which was an act passed by Congress about 15 years ago, checking for the 21st century. Used to be that instead of getting electronic versions of checks in our bank statement, we would get paper copies, which was obviously a big mess, to say the least, and very expensive. Of course, a lot of our residents here in Florida think the paper checks are more safe than paying bills electronically. And which segment is that usually? Let's be honest, senior citizens, I'm afraid so. And they're probably writing paper checks, putting them out in their mailbox for the letter carrier to pick up and raising the little flag. And what can happen then? Yeah, it gets stolen. Yes. So it could be that the criminals who do that steal the information off the check, the bottom of the check, the routing number and account number, and then go to an office supply store, get check stock or check paper and electronic ink and print their own checks with your information on them. Another thing they can do is to check wash, which means they take ink eradicator and wash the information off the check, like the payee, dollar amount, etc., and make it payable to whomever. That's why on gel pens, if you ever look at the back of gel pens, if you're buying them, it says that the American Bankers Association recommends that you use gel pens to write checks. It's because gel pen ink cannot be washed as easily as ballpoint pen ink. Yeah. So if you ever want to write checks and put them outside in your mailbox, make sure you use the gel pen. Best thing to do if you write a paper check, put it in a mailbox personally or give it to the letter carrier person. Any questions there so far? Well, next, some risks of an AIS. So transaction trails can be very volatile. Ooh, they vanish. They may exist only for a short time or not be readable by humans. And that prevents a viable audit trail. That's especially true in real-time systems, which means data are processed right away as they happen. As opposed to a batch system where we wait a while and then process data in mass. So in real-time systems, data are entered directly on the computer. And that's especially true in online transaction processing. That is super fast real time because databases are uploaded immediately when transactions are entered. Just like if we buy a unit, well, the number of units in stock is updated right then and there. But batch systems tend to maintain a better trail of documentation. So with real-time systems, it's a problem to make sure that we document transaction trails. Otherwise, we have no audit trail. Then number 2, a computer processes transactions uniformly by using the same processing transactions, or same processing instructions rather. And that's normally a major strength because there's a consistent application of predefined rules and performance of complex calculations in high volume. However, if there's programming error or similar systematic error in software, then all transactions will be processed incorrectly. And again, it can happen very, very quickly. Many businesses have found out that the hard way. And also, as we know, if there's an information security breach, whoa, a lot of information can get leaked very, very quickly. Well, then number 3, human intervention is reduced. And usually that's an advantage because it reduces human error. But people often tend to overtrust computers, believing they don't make mistakes. They may not internally verify the results or internally verify transaction logs. A good computer system keeps transaction log. It shows who did what and when they did it. These things need to be reviewed. But again, some people just overtrust what comes out of a computer. For example, you may have heard me say this before if you had me for the first auditing course. I used to use a case of where there was a bank wreck and the outstanding checklist was underfooted by $2,000. You wouldn't know that unless you actually re-added the outstanding checks. It was a nice neat computer printout. Well, a lot of people would overtrust that and they wouldn't re-add the amount of outstanding checks. And what do you think somebody within the organization was trying to do with $2,000? Steal it, exactly. They were covering it up. And believe it or not, a lot of cover-ups are just that simple. They truly are. Because fraudsters learn where people don't check. They learn the loopholes in internal control. Well, number 4, unauthorized access. That can be a major risk too. In fact, one of the most important controls in AIS is user authentication. Just like us, if we're using electronic banking or something else, some other application or the internet. An AIS must have strict firewalls, separate information, and user identification and password combinations. Otherwise, an unauthorized user can access the system through a terminal or from anywhere in the world in a web-based system, like from Russia. The auditor in charge of Florida Southern's audit said to us about a year ago that if he wanted to get into an information system, you'll never guess where he would go through. I would have never guessed. He said a copier. Well, people don't think about going through that into the information system, but one could get in because in the end, everything can be printed on a copier around here. So that was interesting. He said that that's very true of other organizations too, certainly, not just us. Number 5, data must be protected. They must be backed up and stored off premises so we don't lose data. Data backup should also follow the son, father, grandfather principle. Did you hear about that in AIS? Okay. The son is today's output. The father is yesterday's output. So if we wanted to recreate the son, we could take the father and run today's data, today's transactions, and recreate the son. The grandfather was the day before yesterday, so we could do the same sort of thing there. Number 6, we'll often mention computer systems combine some duties which should be segregated for good internal control. On a related issue, the computer also authorizes many transactions. This on-demand authorization reduces human involvement, and authorization programs must be very carefully coded. So again, a double-edged sword. It can be a good thing or a bad thing. If it goes wrong. Number 7, an AIS should also have uninterrupted system availability because subject disruptions due to electricity flow, environmental hazards, unauthorized changes in software or data files, and communications problems between devices. So all these things have to be thought of. For example, in an accounting information system, well, excuse me, we have to be mindful here in Florida of hurricanes, very much so. And companies have had their information systems interrupted. In case small companies totally disrupted due to hurricanes. Or another thing that's happened, not really here in the United States, but in other countries is this: communications problems with the internet. By the way, how does internet data normally flow through? What is the medium? How many of you say from continent to continent, satellites? No, not by far. Over 90% of all internet data will go through cables, undersea cables. Faster, more reliable, not affected by weather unless, well, something like a hurricane happens, the cable's not secure. Or if there's an earthquake. Some years ago, I was on the island of Guam and I was communicating with Lynn Clements, who most of you knew, now retired. But there was an earthquake off the coast of Guam, and it destroyed one of the cables going to the island. So internet was almost shut down. It was very, very slow. And I happened to be mentioning in one of my emails to her that the amount of spam consumption that citizens of Guam have, it's one of the highest in the world. And there's a special spam just for Guam. Yuck. So I was talking about spam, and somehow that got filtered out and eventually found its way to her spam filter because I mentioned spam. That was when the data transmission was very limited from Guam. Yeah, sometime take a look at maps of undersea cables. You'll be amazed. You really will. And number 8, AIS problems can be material internal control weaknesses and audits. So yes, they can be major problems. They can be reported in 404 reports about internal control. Any questions there so far? Well, then other. Information systems are under the control of the organization's chief information officer, the CIO. And this should be separate from the accounting function, which should be under the chief financial officer, the CFO. So you want those two segregated as far as duties go. Then B, accountants should also assist in the development of the accounting information system. Then C, systems analysis. It's the process of determining the information needs the organization. So we should be familiar with that term, and the term in D, systems design. Process of formulating a blueprint or plan for the information system. So systems design is drilling down more and coming up with specific plans. And E, systems implementation, involves actively carrying out the blueprint. So putting those plans into action. One extremely important function is systems documentation, which everything is reviewed as recorded accurately. That's extremely important for computer programs. Also Sarbanes-Oxley compliance, and it's required by the SASs. So that's something the auditors could be extremely interested in, and auditors who are interested in that may not be accountants either. They may be information systems people. Large corporations, very often a part of the audit team. So any questions there on chapter 1 with the basics? Well, let's look at chapter 2, some systems techniques and documentation. First of all, flowchart. If you've had AIS, how many of you did flowchart? Okay, good. You don't have to know a lot about it, but just enough to get through the CPA exam. But a flowchart is a symbolic diagram, and it provides a picture of the definition, analysis, or solution of a problem. It presents processing sequentially from the beginning to the final output. Processing usually flows from top to bottom or from left to right in a flowchart, just like we read. And flowcharts are important documents to understand, evaluate, and document an internal control and information system. An assistant flowchart provides an overview of an information system. A program flowchart is for a computer program. And a document flowchart shows the flow of documents through an organization. Areas of responsibility, such as the accounts receivable department, are usually shown in vertical columns. And you should know the basic flowcharting symbols in the book, logical data flow diagrams, the additional symbols. If you have a different edition of the book, your pages may vary slightly. And you should carefully read the section on flowchart, on drawing flowchart, on pages 51 through 54. So just know what's on those pages about flowcharting. That will be fine to get you through the CPA exam. Very often on the CPA exam, they won't have to draw a flowchart on the CPA exam, but very often they will have a flowchart with some blank flowcharting symbols that you need to fill them in. It's a very common type of simulation problem. You'll do just fine as long as you take a look at these pages or know about flowcharting from some other source. Then other methods of documentation. Well, the form and extent of documentation are influenced by the nature and complexity of the controls. The more complex the controls and the more extensive the audit procedures, the more extensive the documentation must be. So a small company, not very extensive. As the company grows, more and more extensive. Another method of documentation, questionnaires. There are a series of interrelated questions about internal control policies and procedures. Then see a narrative memorandum. is a written description of the process and flow of documents and the control process. Then D, a branching or decision table identifies contingencies considered in the description of a problem and the appropriate actions to be taken in each case. Normally presented in matrix form. Did you get into those in AIS? No, not really. Just know what they are. And another method of documentation is checklist, actually, in E, as series procedures be performed. Questions there on chapter 2. Anything there? Right? Well, let's go on chapter 3. E-business and e-commerce. So electronic business, e-business is use of information technology in any aspect of the organization. You may see that with a dash as I have above or with a small e and no dash, like I've got there in A. Same thing with e-commerce. So both are acceptable ways of running these. So e-business, use of information technology in any aspect of the organization, but then e-commerce is the exchange of products using e-business. So selling products. And C, web commerce is e-commerce using the internet. We're all familiar with that. Indeed, electronic networks are groups of computers which are linked together electronically. These can be in local area networks. They span a single site. For example, our copiers here at Florida Southern are linked in a LAN, local area network. But then that has links to bigger stuff. That's why the auditor said he could get in through that. The metropolitan area network, that spans a single metropolitan area, or a wide area network, WAN, which spans at least 2 metropolitan areas. The internet's an even wider network, and that's the one we deal with the most certainly. So just to let you know, LAN's smallest, MAN is the next biggest one, WAN is the next biggest, and the biggest is the internet. I don't know if they will have LANs and MANs and WANs these days on the CPA exam, but just in case they do, you've got those terms. Otherwise, you'd look at that term and you'd scratch your head. Plus, that term might mean the difference between a 74 and 75. You want to get that beloved 75. Do you want a 76? No, you're inefficient by 1 point. Unless you're going to go for one of the awards as the top scorer in the state. Pardon? Sorry. One of the awards, exactly. Yeah. So, I'm going to go for that. How many of you are going for that? I didn't think so. Nah, I was never interested either. No, I've had students who have gotten them in the past. I'm thinking about one I had years ago, and she really didn't do very well in her career. A second one didn't do well in his either. They got so involved in things like studying for that they left everything else behind, basically. Yeah, they were very focused individuals, but unfortunately too focused.
What kind of score is that?
It depends. Way up in the 90s, of course. But it depends upon the scores other people stake in. Yeah, one of those students got in Michigan. So he insisted on moving back to Michigan after being in Florida. So go back where it's really cold. And then he didn't like Michigan, so he came back to Florida. Then he didn't like that again. He went back to Michigan. I would hear from him every now and then. So the last I heard from him, he's back in Michigan. Okay, enjoy the cold weather. He never got very far in his career. He finally went to law school at Western Michigan University. And so I thought, well, maybe that'll be a good thing for him, a CPA and a JD. A lot of opportunities there, but he never tried to take advantage of those opportunities from what I can best see. Okay, bless his heart. So we'll see when I hear from him next. But as a professor, sometimes you'll have a former student contact you. After quite a while, it's like they're checking in, and then you learn their life story from the last time you heard from them until now. He's one of those students. Well, outgrowths of the internet are intranets and extranets, and these are defined by who has access. An intranet is within one organization. So if we talk here at Florida Southern about the portal, that's within one organization. Canvas within one organization. Well, some parts may be inaccessible by those outside. An extranet permits two or more organizations to be linked together. So the internet is a version of the extranet on steroids. Well, then an information factory for the organization includes the following: operational databases, and they store relatively current transaction data for quick access, like this week of sales transactions. So an information factory, just here's a bunch of information we can access. Then data warehouses. They store enormous volumes of current and historical data for use in research and analysis. And that permits data mining, which involves identifying relationships between data and mapping such patterns. Data mining a very big interest to marketing people. And it's something for which artificial intelligence is being applied big time, because marketers would love to know all kinds of things about us. And this is one way in which they can. And if you're thinking that sounds creepy, I agree with you. And number 3, the process of moving data from outside sources into the data warehouse is called extract, transform, and load. ETL, like another acronym. We'll cover a lot more of these topics when we get the sales and collection cycle later in the course. Questions here on chapter 3. Well, here in chapter 4, transaction processing and the internal control process over that. So a little introduction. First of all, much of this chapter reviews the internal control material that we covered back in the first auditing course. That's okay. And this outline includes the additional features we need. So first of all, transaction processing controls. We can divide these into general and application controls. We should know the difference. Well, general controls concern the overall environment of the transaction processing. They may affect the organization's entire IT environment. An auditor must be satisfied that they're properly designed and operating before relying on application controls. Strong general controls are a necessary but not sufficient condition for strong application controls. Well, what's application control? Application controls are specific to an individual application. So a general control would be general information security over the entire system. An application control would be controls applied to the company's Webcommerce functions, for example. So application controls are more specific. You can't have good application controls unless you have good general controls. Then B, general controls include the following. Well, the plan of data processing and operation. A big thing, we've studied it before in the first auditing course, segregation of duties. And a key consideration in an IT environment is separation of users of information from those in data processing, because computer combines a lot of duties. So this is one way in which we try and keep as many duties as possible segregated, separate from each other so they serve as checks and balances. And so we don't place one person in the position to commit a fraud and be able to cover it up. Well, data processing should be centralized so that we have security there. And the following employees should be separated within data processing. First of all, programmers. They develop software. Have separate systems analysts. They develop the general design of applications based on the analysis of user needs. And separate computer operators. They operate mainframe computers. Extremely important that they not have access to detailed programming listings. Otherwise, they might be able to change those programs and be able to do what they want, like bypass security over the amount of commission salespeople get. If they have a buddy who is selling and earning commissions, maybe they could patch or change the software so that that person suddenly earns a really big paycheck or some other type of fraud. Then library. Maintains a depository of computer programs and documentation. Thus, is responsible for the custody of information assets. Then data control clerks. They establish control over jobs and input data. And that includes the quality of the input, the completeness of processing, and the reasonableness of output. They're in charge of looking over all that good stuff. Well, general controls also include general operating procedures, including making sure that we have an uninterrupted power supply. Equipment control features so that our equipment will not get damaged, etc. Will not have unauthorized access to it. Also, with equipment and data access control so that nobody can access our equipment and thereby access data and do something bad. There are examples of each in your book. Not really worried about those examples, but in case you like to look at them. And then application controls. They include input controls, processing controls, output controls. It's an example of each in your book. And processing controls may be divided into the following types. First of all, preventative controls. They act to prevent errors and fraud before they happen. Then detective controls. If errors or fraud do happen, well, detective controls are going to act to uncover errors and fraud after they occur. We'd rather put our money in preventative controls and prevent things from happening to start with, of course. And then number 3, corrective controls. They act to correct errors. So if an error happens, a corrective control hopefully can fix it. For example, if we make an error as we are ordering on the internet, on that first screen, which is our order, we press the submit button. On the next screen, there is what's wrong. That's a detected control. If it suggests how to fix it, there's a corrective control at work. And that's why I need to tell you about AIS today. Any questions there? Ding, ding. Well, certainly as questions do arise, you just let me know. Always glad to go over those with you. And as you know, you have instructions for taking the exam, which you'll do on your own time. And certainly if you have any questions there, you just let me know too. Well, as you know, from Thursday until the following Tuesday, we have WAD here, Florida 7. Fall break, that's right. A little bit different this year in the way of days. We don't get a whole week off, but we weren't going to meet next week anyway, so it doesn't affect us. All right. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes. It's a little while. Yeah, so you have a break.
So a quick question. We have 4 blank assignments. 30% is only those 4 that will get.
You'll have a little more.
You have some more?
Yeah, with sales and collection cycle. Right? A little more in the way of blind assignments later on. Anything else? Okay, well, have a great fall break, and I'll see you here in 2 weeks. Bye-bye. Sure, Sherry.